Welcome to another edition of Hey Bobby with Senior VP of the Cleveland Guardians, my good friend Bob DiBiasio with us. And Bob, you've been through a lot of those trade deadline scenarios and talks, and you've seen a lot of the outcomes of the trade deadline work by what other management was in place over the last 30 years there with our Cleveland Indians, now Guardians. Is there a trade or two that stands out to you? Not necessarily how it went or benefited, but is there a trade or two that stood out to you that the Guardians/Indians made at the trade deadline?
Absolutely. Whenever you talk trade, though, it has to start. And I know we want to talk trading deadline, but anytime the word trade pops up, I have to talk January 20th, 1965, because that's when Rocky Colavito came back to Cleveland to play, a generational hero. My birthday is January 24th, and I'll never forget I was 10 years old, was going to be 10 years old, and my mother told me that I got an early birthday present that Rocky was coming back to Cleveland in a trade on January 20th. And so there's two periods, right? When you talk trades, there's the winter meetings where lots of trades happen, and then the trading deadline. And obviously, we acquired Carlos Sandy and Chris James at a winter meetings for Joe Carter. We acquired Kenny Lofton at a winter meetings to reshape the face of this franchise. And you talk about trading deadlines. I think the Andrew Miller trade 2016, right on the deadline, we traded two of our number one draft picks, Clint Frazier and Justice Sheffield, left-handed pitcher, to the Yankees for Andrew Miller, and that changed the face of who we were for that postseason. Took us all the way to extra innings, a Game 7 of the World Series, of course. So I think that has to go down as one of the great trading deadline moves in franchise history. I'll never forget the Bartolo Colon trade when we got Brandon Phillips and Cliff Lee and the incredibly talented Grady Sizemore for a rental, as Bartolo Colon, I think, only started 15, 17 games for the Expos that year. And Ray, I'll never forget it because the Expos were in Pittsburgh and we were in the midst of a late night news release writing and trying to finalize the details of the trade and the news release and waiting to determine when we were going to announce it. And we had an agreement with the Montreal Expos that we would not release the trade, the information, until after both games were completed, because you had to inform a couple players. Well, Pirates and the Expos in Pittsburgh were in a rain delay, and their PR guy chose on his own, without asking his GM or without telling us. He just decided during this lengthy rain delay that he was going to announce the trade, and he announced it that the Montreal Expos acquired Bartolo Colon as they were fighting to go. They were in a pennant race, that they acquired Bartolo Colon in exchange for Lee Stevens and 3 minor leaguers. Now, obviously, we wrote it where we acquired 3 of the top prospects in all of baseball, Brandon Phillips, Cliff Lee, and Grady Sizemore, in addition to getting first baseman Lee Stevens. So we had it completely, and oh my goodness, Mark was so mad at the GM of the Expos, and I was just not so kind to my colleague at the Expos, the PR guy, for releasing it when he shouldn't, and how he released it. And so we had to play catch up all night long, because on, TAM and the sports talk after the game, they were ripping us like nobody's business, because all people thought is we acquired Lee Stevens for Bartolo Colon.
And he was really number 4 of the trade, right, Bobby? I mean, the other 3 were much ahead of him in the thought process.
They were the reason the trade was made. You know, the Cy Young, future Cy Young Award winner, and Cliff Lee, having one of the greatest performances of a pitcher in our franchise history, and obviously what Grady did. While Brandon Phillips didn't get it done with us because of the trade to Cincy, he was a multiple All-Star. Then Corey Kluber, you know, we trade Jake Westbrook. There's a 3-team deal. Jake Westbrook goes to St. Louis. St. Louis sends some people to San Diego. We get, I think, a Class A, Double-A guy named Corey Kluber, and who ends up, you know, winning 2 Cy Young Awards, of course, and he finished third in the Cy Young balloting 2 more times. So one of the best pitchers in our franchise history, in a pitching rich franchise for sure. So that one I thought was a heck of a trading deadline. You know, we get Michael Brantley and Matt Laporta for CC Sabathia was an interesting trading deadline deal as well. So you know,
And
we've
that was
had
an
our share of
interesting
good ones.
that was an interesting one too, because I remember Laporta was the top prospect and Brantley was kind of the other guy in the trade. It ended up being reversal for us.
Well, you know, it's interesting. We um, were able to get Michael Brantley only because Milwaukee made the postseason. If they did not make the postseason, there was a list of players that Mark could identify and take from. If they made the postseason, there was a different list that added a couple of their top prospects, which Michael Brantley was on the one list and not the other. And we were able to get Michael Brantley in return. And I think CC, just like Bartolo, he might have pitched 15, 16 games or something like that for Milwaukee and pitched them into the postseason. But yeah, just imagine, Ray, the sleepless nights, the poker game you have to play as a general manager. Our organization just went through an absolutely exhaustive draft with the number 1 pick and 3 in the top 48 and 4 in the top 84. So our whole entire baseball operations was just laser focused on making sure we got that right, and then to switch completely to the trading deadline. You know, with the way our offense is unfortunately struggling, you know, we all thought, hey, you know, can you get a starting pitcher? Well, everybody wants that, and there aren't any out there. Hell, half the starting rotation in baseball is on the injured list, for goodness sakes. So that's going to be interesting. But then you add the aspect of we need a hitter. Can always use bullpen help, although I think that's probably third on the list for us. So it's going to be very interesting to see what Chris and Cherney and the group are able to get done this trading deadline.
And as you and I always talk, they know what they're doing. So I
Yes.
can't wait to see what they kind of do. The second part of our show, and we're talking with Senior VP of the Guardians, Bob DiBiasio with Hey Bobby, is we often have talked about the 90s teams of mashing the ball and the table setter with Lofton and all that. I don't know if we've talked enough about the importance of that team and their fortunes with Charles Nagy. Nagy was the guy that came up and he was a pinpoint control pitcher and really stabilized the rotation for us. And I know he's near and dear to you as well. And I thought maybe you could elaborate a little bit on what Charles Nagy meant to this baseball franchise.
Well, let's first talk personal. Charlie Nagy, I love that man to death. He, Carlos Baerga, Sandy Alomar, you know, 3 stalwarts played at Cleveland Stadium. And as we were moving from Cleveland Stadium into this brand new, beautiful baseball only ballpark in downtown Cleveland, they never said no to me. The three of those guys, when I asked them to do some media events or corporate partner events, they never ever said no, and forever indebted to the professionalism of those three gentlemen. You know, Chuck was a #1 draft pick out of the University of Connecticut, 1988. Played on the U.S. Olympic team in 1988 in an Olympic year here. We're close to Paris Olympics coming up. So he always, I've asked him about that in the past, what it's like to whenever he sees the Olympics, and he just bursts with pride that he could say that he was a member of Team USA. As you know, anybody who's ever had that honor just considers it one of the greatest achievements of their life to represent the country. He won 129 games. He's in the top 10 wins in our franchise histories, and ranked 5th in shutouts, the most consistent pitcher of that era. You know, he helped us win 6 straight American League Central Division titles, and just again, one of the most absolute consistent performers. The thing about Chuck that's interesting is he was an old time guy in terms of he ran. You know, there was a change in philosophy on building up the strength of pitchers. In the 50s and 60s and 70s, it was pitchers ran to keep their legs strong, because that was how you generated your power, was pushing off your legs and going towards home plate with some velocity. And then there, obviously, with sports science and strength and conditioning, there is different ways to, you know, create a strong lower body. But Chuck was a runner. You'd see him running around downtown Cleveland. He'd go out and go through the elephant doors in left field at Progressive Field, and he'd just run up the ramp out onto the streets of the city of Cleveland. The next thing you know, an hour later or whatever, he'd come jogging through the elephant doors during batting practice. And I just think the world of him. Ray, one of the fun things about him, he a 3-time All-Star, and he's pitching in the 92 All-Star game, and he goes, I think, 1, 2, 3 in his inning, and he comes into the dugout, and Tom Kelly, the old manager of the Twins, is the American League All-Star manager, and Chuck thinks his day is done, so he's sort of putting his stuff away and deciding possibly to go into the clubhouse and just ice down. And Tom Kelly says, "Hey, I made a mistake. I don't have any more players. You're going to have to hit." So he had to grab, I can't remember off the top of my head. I've got it somewhere, that he grabbed somebody's bat, somebody's helmet, some batting gloves, went up to the plate, and he's facing Doug Jones, the old Cleveland pitcher, Doug Jones. And they were teammates at one time. And he dribbles one off of Doug Jones down the left field, or down the third baseline. And Jonesy picks it up, and Chuck, being a runner, you know, beat it out. So it was the first hit by a pitcher in an All-Star game in 29 years.
Oh, that's a great story.
Yeah, so that's one of my fun highlights of Mr. Nagy.
Charles Nagy. There you go. Senior VP with the Cleveland Guardians, our good friend Bob DiBiasio with us with another edition of Hey Bobby. Always appreciate him making time with us and talking baseball and Guardians baseball. Bob, thanks again, my friend. We'll do it again next week.
Yes, sir. Always love it. Thanks, Ray. Go Guardians.